So what we're gonna do is we're gonna dial in VE. Fuck MAF. It's in the past. Nobody needs it.
All right. That's what
Everybody,
I thought you would
everybody
say.
should run speed density. Everybody should run
I
speed
agree.
density.
As a businessman, fellow businessman. Fact.
I mean,
What are the
speed,
drawbacks or like gains from speed density?
so speed density is going to give you a few different gains. There's only one drawback, and it can absolutely be counteracted. Um, I'll start with the drawback. The drawback is you, on average, get like 1 to 2 worse miles per gallon with speed density. But the reason for it is one of the positives. The positives are, number one, it's more responsive because you're not waiting for the input and feedback from MAF and essentially your circuit, and the feedback from your O2 sensors, etc. On top of that, what you're physically doing with speed densities, you're calculating the amount of airflow that should be happening at that given time instead of using a sensor to tell you how much airflow you have. That sensor can be screwed up many ways because the mass airflow sensor, it's in your intake tract. So on the VB, for example, it's like a couple inches or a few inches behind your literal intake. Let's say your intake falls off. I mean, we've seen it happen multiple times at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's happened to DGM, it's happened to One Boot, I'm sure it's happened to many other people. Basically, if it falls off, your car, your ECU can still calculate the amount of airflow that's going in without that MAF sensor input, because the intake falling off happens after the MAF sensor input. So, I mean, obviously, it's not even going to pull air in through it because it's, an open system at that point. But basically, anything that can go wrong, like compressor surge can happen, which can throw off your MAF readings. You can have something breaks and it'll throw off your MAF readings. MAF, the pipeline in the ECU for MAF actually uses your VE tables regardless when you're in transient throttle. And so our understanding of dialing MAF is already wrong, as it's like our understanding isn't wrong, but the common understanding of it is already wrong. I mean, you can make it so your trims look pretty good, but the thing is, like, if your VE tables were what they were actually supposed to be, it would then throw off your MAF sensor output in the first place. At least at the end of the pipeline.
So it just makes more sense to fully eliminate the MAF and just rely on speed density.
It genuinely, honest to God, does. And don't get me wrong, I'm the person that made speed density for the VB, so yes, I'm biased, but I also, believe it or not, thank you. I've never run speed density on my own car because I created it after I blew up my engine. So the feedback I've gotten is all from other people that I've given it to. They've told me these things. I mean, they can get their idle trims down to less than 1%, as well as your wide open throttle trims. I mean, your trims all the time can be less than 1%, with the exception of doing something fucky with DFCO. But at the end of the day, speed density is legitimately just a superior route to calculating airflow versus an MAF sensor. It's like having our OTS for this car, that for the VB, it's currently in full-time closed loop for fueling. There's nothing better than having full-time open loop air and full-time closed loop fuel. It really is a symbiotic relationship, and it'll lead to a lot of really good things.
The air calculation it has no connection to any other sensor. It's just based on the actual calculation.
The air calculation is based off of RPM and your manifold absolute pressure and your volumetric efficiency. Those are the inputs going into it.
So, okay, so you're not taking anything from O2 sensor. You're not taking anything from anywhere else.
Correct. Correct. Yep. Because the O2 sensor, I mean, that still feeds into your closed loop fueling, don't get me wrong, but it does not feed into the open loop.
All right. That's very interesting. And that also gives you one more like loose input too, right?
Yes, in fact, it does.
Like for, I don't know, anti-lag.
I mean, for whatever the hell you want to put into it, essentially.
Anti-lag. Did I hear anti-lag?
Yeah.
I'll show y'all some anti. I wish I got a video of blowing up my engine.
What
I know, I'm
happened?
so disappointed, bro.
If I was there, I would have recorded it.
Was it track driving or street driving?
It was street driving.
Sitting in a
tested.
parking lot.
It was actually like right outside of my neighborhood.
Okay.
I ran the first anti-lag on a VB, and it worked great the first 2 times. Third time, it might have been a little bit too powerful. I shattered 3 pistons at once, but it's because I was leaning out because I was still spraying methanol at the same time as running anti-lag and fuel cutting, as well as the fact that I was targeting 20 psi. So I maxed out at about 23 psi of anti-lag while I was launching, and that was at like 4K RPM. Yeah, I mean, long story short, I did a really dumb thing, but no, I mean, anti-lag works. It absolutely works.
That's
all that matters.
Awesome. Except for the blowing up the motor part. I don't recommend that.
I don't recommend it either, but I'll tell you what, we're coming back stronger.
Yeah. My buddy's Mazda Speed 3, guess what? It blew up. Shocking. They never do that. I know. He was honestly, it was entirely his fault. He had a bad O2 sensor. His tuner sent him a base map and said, "Hey, don't rip on this car." And 4 months later, on the same bad O2 sensor, he was going 125 miles an hour at the top of 5th gear and melted a hole through his piston and then through the cylinder.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good job, buddy.
It sounds about right.
Oops.
All right. So let's see here. These are really, for dialing VE, I think these are the only 2 tracks we really need to start off with. So what we have up top is your fuel trims, the same as we had for MAF, wideband long-term, wideband short-term, wideband total, and total is the one we realistically care about at the end of the day. And then we have engine RPM down here. So basically, I'm going to go ahead. 0 is always the goal for your trims. And if you have to err on a side of caution, negative is better than positive, because negative means that you're running richer and positive means that you're running leaner than you're supposed to. Closed loop does basically fix this for you. However, we want it to do it itself. We want it to be on point all of the time, regardless of what else is happening. So, for example, here we have total correction of 0% at 4,300, so that's fantastic. I'm really not worried about dialing in VE at that point. And VE, again, is volumetric efficiency, which is going to be found inside of airflow, VE, and volumetric efficiency, TGV closed and TGV open. TGV closed, if you're running on the OTS, we don't use TGV closed because they open up as soon as you turn on the car. So we're going to basically be working entirely out of TGV open for this video at a minimum. However, dialing TGV closed works the exact same way. The only difference is if you're working with TGVs open and closed, I would add another track and somewhere in here there is a TGV activation percentage or whatever it's called. It doesn't look like it's being logged here. Again, I actually don't need it because TGVs are always open on this tune, but just FYI, that's the only other thing you need to pay attention to if you're not always TGV open. So, right here, we know it's fantastic. And I clicked right there because now that I've clicked there, And let me get onto the right calibration here,
Put on these
because I'm
nails.
actually going to dial in this calibration on this video. So right here, we know it's perfect, right at this spot. Now, when I have this clicked, like selected here, there's the line, obviously, as you guys can see. Now that I go over to Airflow VE, it has a dot here, a yellow dot, where I have selected. So I know for a fact at 4,400 RPM, 17.4 MAP, we're on the money. We're looking so good. I do not want to change that. Now, what I will want to change, going back over here, is let's say I'm going to start right here because this is where the 10% is, and then it begins to get better. I'll do right here. So now that I've done that, we have here. So this being at 3,700 RPM, we're at negative 10%. The other really cool thing about speed density is when you're, I don't really know the reason for this to be entirely transparent, but when you're dialing in MAF, you basically want to take the square root of whatever the correction factor is. When you're dialing in speed density, you can essentially take your trims and act like they're gospel. So negative 10%, we're running 10% too rich. VE, that means it thinks there's 10% too much air, which means VE needs to go down by about 10%. Now again, I'd rather err on the side of caution. So what I'm gonna do here in this area, starting with these two cells, multiply. I'm gonna do it about 0.925. So we're taking off 7.5% here. There we go. That'll give 2.5% margin of error if next time I get a data log from this person, trims end up showing 2.5% in this area. Chances are I'm not going to correct it because 2.5% is very well within acceptable margins of error. Typically, your average pro tuner is going to try to keep you within between 10 and 5%. Or your average e-tuner, pro tuner, whatever you want to call it. But I typically strive to be within 3% if possible. So again, 2.5% would be more than okay. So I've already made that adjustment right here, and I'm not going to save anything yet because of the fact that it will show me these that I adjusted still. So I know that I've already gone and I've handled this area. Now if I go back over here, slightly lower RPM, same area, we're good.
What
Raise
VE are you
RPM.
aiming for?
I'm aiming for the accurate VE. Whatever whatever makes trims 0% essentially is what I'm aiming for. Because
All right.
VE, like we don't pick VE. VE is decided via the mods and changes you've done to your vehicle. That's what determines VE. So you don't really pick your VE, you're not shooting for VE, you're just shooting to have your trims be as on point as physically possible, and that means your VE is correct.
And your fuel trims, that's how much it's being adjusted off of the base fueling map?
Correct. Absolutely correct. Because
Based on what, DAM?
no. So basically, via your car decides fueling by figuring out how much air is going through the system at that moment, by how much air is going into your cylinders. Then once it knows how much air there is, then it decides how much fuel to inject. So basically, if your fueling is off here and you haven't done anything else weird like change your fuel type, so change stoic or anything along those lines, then your fueling calculations should be correct for how much fuel is needed for X amount of air. So basically, we know if fueling is correct, then obviously our air must be off if our trims are off. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're adjusting the base fuel table so that the car doesn't have to do as much lifting to get the right amount of fuel in.
What we're actually
Or like-
doing is we're adjusting essentially the base air table. Because it's correct with how much fuel is needed per unit of air. that we're assuming that's correct. And in this situation, in this scenario, I know it is because they're running regular gas. They're running 93. If you're running ethanol, I would recommend essentially getting your VE tables figured out on gas first, making them within acceptable spec, and then changing to ethanol, because your VE won't change between gas and ethanol. The only thing that changes is your your stoichiometric ratio, essentially. So before and after, switching from gas to ethanol, for example, your trim should stay the same if you've adjusted your stoic ratio properly. Because the car is correct in how much fuel it needs for X amount of air when running gas.
Okay. So wait, what air table are you changing?
We are changing volumetric efficiency.
Wait, I thought you were aiming for a specific volumetric efficiency.
So we're
No.
aiming for specific trims. And you're okay, keep asking questions. This is literally the whole reason I have this. We're aiming for specific trims because the trims are not lying to us. They're true. And the way that we change the expected amount, like the way we dial in the amount of air that's actually going
go
into
over
the engine.
pipeline again. Like
Yeah.
start with what the speed density actually does.
So
'Cause it seems
speed
like that's not
density.
clear yet.
And Michael, we're gonna have to cut this part out of the
Oh,
video.
buddy. I'm gonna blur all
No,
of
just
this.
move it to the front. Yeah, it'll be good for other people. Like start with just how math works first, and then why it needs to even be in that car, and then go on to why speed density, what it does instead. I think would
I
probably
I,
be
I understand math. I get how that's measured.
so.
Yeah, this is math.
Yeah,
You understand that it responds with the sensor outputs a certain amount of hertz, and the amount of hertz it outputs in turn means you're moving this amount of air, which is what this cell is down here. So that's how
Yeah.
math works, and
and on the VA
that's
it's a
what.
voltage instead of hertz. But same
Yes,
idea, exactly.
yes, correct. So yes, math just it's like, hey, there's this much airflow past the sensor, therefore we know downstream we're moving about this much air, and it's relatively accurate in most scenarios. I mean, not entirely accurate, but relatively. Changing intakes and everything will screw that up, or yeah, the size of the mass of air moving around that sensor. However, that's neither here nor there right now. But essentially, there's a certain frequency output by the MAF sensor, and that means you're moving. If it's this frequency, 9687, then you're moving about 276, grams per second, essentially, of air. So what speed density does is it takes your manifold absolute pressure, your RPM, manifold air temp, and your volumetric efficiency. So what it's doing is essentially knowing what the air temperature is, and right here we're using a manifold air temperature because that's where the air is right before it goes into your actual cylinders. Knowing manifold air temperature, it knows the density of air at that temperature at a given pressure. So it knows how much air is there with that temperature and with the pressure. That's also why we have the pressure, because you need both of those things. Now, RPM is because you need to know, we're in 4-stroke engines, so we know how many actual air input strokes there are, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're at 6,000 RPM, you're taking in air this many times per second at this pressure, which is the manifold absolute pressure, and at this temperature, which is the manifold air temperature. Therefore, you can calculate exactly how much air it physically is. Now, you're also calculating volumetric efficiency because an engine, as we know, is not perfectly efficient. In a perfect world, we'd be at 100% and up. But there are things that keep certain amounts or certain areas of air from moving, and they vary by the amount of pressure and by the RPM that you're at, currently speaking. So essentially, the SD speed density VE table final. This is literally coming from the VE table that we have here. And then the only reason we have mass airflow corrected in here, it's as a reference point for all of the fancy analytical custom parameters that we have, which if they were logged by this person that I'm tuning for, it would literally tell you what the VE should be at any given point. Like it does all the math for you, it does all of it, you literally just edit it. Which is why under gauges, you always want to have at least tuning and driving turned on for your custom features, because that way it'll log every custom parameter that's at that log level. These are all at tuning, so it would log all of them as long as you have tuning selected down here in the bottom right. And yeah, it would do all this math for you, everything like that. But go ahead.
So you're changing the VE table to have the ECU aim for certain VEs by adjusting fueling.
So we're not. Let me think.
Adjusting air, like how much air the car thinks it has or knows it has.
So yeah, we're not aiming for any specific VE. We use VE to dial in and to make our basically mass airflow output, because that's what we're taking over is the mass airflow sensor. We just took it over completely with this hook. To make that as accurate as physically possible, we're changing the VE table. But we're not aiming for anything VE-wise. We're aiming for trims to be 0%.
Right. So the edits you're making on the VE table are they're I don't quite get what they're supposed to change on the input side.
So they are an input in and of themselves. They're not changing anything input side. Again, Michael, we'll have to blur this out. But basically, manifold, absolute pressure, and RPM, they're going, let's see, SDVE table final, it's going here. Okay, so it's going after all of the calculations, everything like that. Basically, whatever manifold absolute pressure is, times your RPM, because it's able to keep up with all of those taking, with the engine taking air on each of those cycles. Manifold absolute pressure times RPM times the density at whatever your air temperature currently is. These give you the density they give you the density of the air, which in turn, because we know volume, because of 2.4 liter, because we know volume, have density, we can determine the amount of air going into the engine. So where VE comes in is at the very end of the pipeline, because let's say at 800 RPM, when you're idling, you typically idle in this cell right here, to be entirely honest. That's where your idle ends up falling. In that specific cell, so in that area, in idle area, where you're at 4.35 absolute pressure, so basically negative 10 boost, negative 10 PSI boost, and 800 RPM, even though, essentially with the way the math works out between RPM, temperature, and pressure, let's say you're at, just for shits and giggles, this is wrong, but sure, for shits and giggles, let's say you're at 100 grams per second in those calculations. The thing is, the volumetric efficiency of the car, of the engine, only physically allows for 76% of that air to make its way into the cylinder. That's where VE comes in.
And then why are you changing the VE table?
Because this okay, so that's a fair question. Because so let's look at the stock VE table for reference. This is your stock VE table right here, the 2023 VB VE table. All of these values, so this is 75, which is pretty close, but it's still wrong. And also, if you look at the right below it, in the stock VE table, it's saying that, what was it?
It was like 60 some.
Yeah, it's saying 68% of the air that's in your manifold, that we've calculated of 2.4 liters. It's saying 68% of the air is making it into the cylinder, when in all reality, the stock VE table is very wrong. And we're actually closer in that area of 85% of the air going into making it into the cylinders at that point in time of that pressure and that RPM. So the reason we're editing it is because it's wrong.
Okay. And by editing it, you're making the air part of the fuel calculation more efficient,
I mean, we're
or like more accurate.
literally making, more accurate is what I would use, and that's entirely correct. That's exactly what we're doing, because
So-
the air calculation on stock VE tables simply is wrong. But it can be edited very easily, like we're doing here, and yeah, it's a fairly easy fix, because it's actually 85.5% of the air that you expect is making it into the cylinder versus the 65%. And the other thing to keep in mind is that VE tables change with most modifications. That's why we make mods to the cars, because we're trying to increase the efficiency of the system. And essentially, in a perfect world, you want all of these numbers to be as high as physically possible. Because, such as when you're up here, you're seeing 108, 109. That's fantastic. And I have some people I tune for, they're up in the 120s.
Wow.
Because they have a modified setup, so they're actually getting more air flowing in than you would expect.
So stuff like head flow and like runner width, or like the actual, I guess you could say circumference. How big the runners are, all of those would increase volumetric efficiency.
Theoretically.
Yeah, they can either increase. Yeah, they can either increase or decrease depending on anything from size, whether that be open area inside of the tube, or shape, or what have you. Many, many things. But yes, no, you're absolutely correct. The size, shape, all of those things do affect your volumetric efficiency, and definitely VE is realistically where people should be bragging. Anybody can brag about horsepower because they decided to shove 40 pounds of boost inside of their engine. And yeah, congrats if it lives for a couple minutes. But the big thing is, if you have higher VE, you're making the most out of the air inside of this system. And the air in these engines, I mean, there's definitely a fuel restriction that most people are going to hit around 500-ish horsepower, maybe a little bit before. But generally speaking, air is the largest restriction within this system.
Okay, and how does this all relate to the fuel trim?
So let's look here. Fuel targets closed loop, because we stay in full-time closed loop. TGB's open, low EGR. All right, your fuel targets, and I have my fuel in Lambda. Sorry if that confuses anybody. But
No, I
learn it.
prefer Lambda.
Thank you. Finally,
Disgusting.
somebody of
The way
class.
it should be.
So you're always targeting this fuel mixture, whatever that cell is for that given load and that given RPM. You're always going to be targeting 0.75. Just right here, you're always going to target 0.75, whatever. It's because that's what your fuel table is set to. So your wide bands, which are what give you the trims, your wide band, it knows whether or not you're at 0.75 based on the amount of oxygen remaining in your exhaust. So it always knows what 0.75 lambda looks like. It's going to be accurate on that. So, because you know what your fuel is, and you know your fuel's accurate because you're running gas, or you already know the stoic ratio for your ethanol, what have you. But we're just going to talk gas here. Because you know the engine knows how much gas it needs to inject for a given amount of air to reach this fuel target. That means if your trims are off, it's not because you injected fuel wrong. It's because the amount of air that it thinks it has, which it then uses to determine the amount of fuel it needs to inject, is wrong. It's the air that's wrong. It's not the fuel that's wrong. Because it uses the amount of air to calculate. Now, let's just say, again, hypothetical numbers, they are wrong. But hypothetically, let's say you have 100 grams per second. All right, realistically, up here, you're going to be closer to 300 or 250, whatever. Let's say you have 200 grams per second of air. It knows it needs to inject, again, shits and giggles, it needs to inject 10 grams of fuel. It knows how long that the injection pulse width needs to be at what fuel pressure, or at any given fuel pressure, in order to make 0.75 lambda at that given amount of air. So it's not wrong in its fuel calculation. We know that because the cars run open loop properly, like OEM. They do run properly. Your trims aren't totally fucked unless you do something dumb. But the thing is, when you're using closed loop fuel, it's purely judging the amount of fuel it needs to inject based on the amount of air that it believes is going into the cylinder. And that's the key word, believes, because there is no air, there's no MAF sensor, there's no airflow sensor inside or right before your cylinder where it's like, okay, we have this amount of air going into each cylinder. It just knows, typically from MAF, it's like, okay, we have 300 grams per second of air moving past this. That means there's 300 grams per second of air going into the cylinders. So we're going to inject this amount of fuel because that's how we hit 0.75 lambda at this amount of air.
So pause. The amount of air going in on the fuel table is before the adjustment for volumetric efficiency.
Volumetric efficiency is after the volumetric efficiency is before the amount of air that's used to calculate fuel, because the amount of air that's used to calculate fuel is MAF final, MAF, corrected final, what have you. So the amount of air that it's using to judge the amount of fuel is your MAF final. Again, we just overwrote that with speed density here. But VE is the last thing that goes into the air calculation. Literally the last thing that goes into the air calculation before it's used to calculate the amount of fuel.
Okay, and you're changing VE so that the amount, the actual ratio going into the cylinder is more accurate.
Precisely, yes.
Okay, I think I got it.
It is complicated.
That's going to take some time to digest, but I also have an exam tomorrow, so I got to get back to studying.
You're good. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me, what have you, do whatever. No, by all means, ask away.
What's your exam on?
It's calc, but
Which number calc?
2, the annoying one.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
You got a
I will be
calculator?
fine. Yes.
Oh, easy.
Yeah. It won't be difficult. I just gotta practice a little bit.
Got 2 calculators. Calc is short for.
Yeah, when the teacher comes by, just swap out for the one without the cheats.
No, I'm just going to be playing Doom on my calculator the entire exam.
Oh, I watch hentai on mine.
Oh, okay.
Anti-racing.
Anti-racing, baby.
Anti-racing, baby.
Fastest to come. Fastest to go.
You go.
Bro, that's so good.
All right. I do also have to go very, very soon. I am, however, glad that I was able to explain that for you. So I'm only going to make one more change here real quick. So we know trims are 0% here, which is right here. So in between the two areas, one where we had negative and 0, we have negative 5%, very literally. Lucky. It's simple. Which is going to be right here in this area. So I know it's only on this cell right here. I just happen to know from experience that need to be adjusted. So since we have 5% negative trims, aka it's rating 5% too fat or too rich, which means it thinks we have 5% too much here. That means we're going to reduce this by 5%. So I'm going to do 0.95. Easy peasy. Now, next time this is going
last question.
accurate. Go ahead.
The fuel trim that's a measurement straight off the wideband.
Sorry, one more time.
The fuel trim, is that the percentage of air that is left over when it gets to the exhaust, or the percentage of oxygen that is left over when it gets to the exhaust relative to how much is supposed to have been burned?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. 100%.
Okay. Now I got it all. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to studying now.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
No worries. Take it easy.
Feel free to DM me if you guys have any product ideas. I'm open to any and all.
Hell yeah. No, by all means, expect to hear something.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you. See you
Take it
guys.
easy.
See
See ya.
Bye.
All right. To be entirely honest, that is where I'm going to leave things off.